This video is proudly sponsored by New Type. Tools, accessories, model kits, these guys have it. Hop over to newtypeshq.com and use promo code Otaku for 10% off on your next purchase. Welcome my dudes and dudettes to episode 2 on how to install Evans Designs LEDs into your favorite Gundam. So today, by popular demands, we are going to be tackling the Tallgeese model kit, particularly the Master Grade. So the three key areas that we're going to be focusing all our attention on is the boosters, the waist boosters, as well as the head. Now when it comes to the head, we're not going to actually install an LED light to the point where it overblows the visor. In fact, we want to perch the LED at an angle in which where it lights it up from the bottom all the way up instead of it being directly fired at the visor. Now before we do any kind of cutting and drilling, we need to evaluate on where we're going to actually place the LED light for this Gundam. Now normally you just put it dead center into the head. In fact, we're going to do the complete opposite. We're going to put it at the very bottom of the square, and that way the light is shooting upward to illuminate the visor. Next up, we need to evaluate to see how bright this LED light is going to be. So as you can clearly see here from this example, it's very bright, so it's going to create that weird ghosting transparent effect onto the white pieces. So you're going to need to hit that area up with a flat black, just like what I did in my last video. But the most important step we need to do for the visor is hit it with a Tamiya clear blue. Now normally people would just say just put in a blue LED light. No, the brightness ratio is very low. But with something with a clear white, it'll get the job done. So next step up, we hit these up with some primer and make them look good. Nice. Now that we got most of the pieces fully painted and ready to be assembled, now we can actually install the LED lights. Now this part's very critical. When it comes to using the actual Dremel, you don't want to have to use it in the highest RPM. You want to use it at the lowest setting, because at the highest setting, you're going to melt the plastic and it's going to create unnecessary warping, and it's not going to look nice and clean. You want to try to avoid that as best as possible. Now for the next step, this is very critical because not every super glue is created equal. In fact, any kind of thin glue would actually damage the LED lights. So I'm going to use a thicker glue to actually lock the LED in place. Once that's actually positioned to the way I want it, then I'm going to hit it with a accelerant to lock it in faster. Now you could just let it sit and dry. It'll take about 30 to 40 minutes, but for those who have the itch to get started on the next part of the model kit, I would highly recommend that you use this, but don't use the spray nozzle because it just disperses everywhere. Just use the hose, use like an actual toothpick or a Q-tip just to dab the area with the glue, but gently dab it, because if you do it for long periods of time, it will glue onto the surface rather quickly. Now this next part's a bit tricky because I need to funnel the electrical wire down to the polycap area, so what I'm going to be using is the same Dremel I used to actually drill the hole in to create a nice groove in the center. Once I got that properly placed, then I can actually finally drill a hole down next to the polycap. Now this part can be a bit tricky, but if you successfully already installed the lights for the Gundam head right now, this shouldn't be a problem at all. So much like when it came to installing the electrical wire into the Gundam head, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're not going to drill a hole directly into the center of the thruster. In fact, we're going to drill a hole, once again at the lowest RPM settings to create less warping in the plastic, at the very top of the thruster, like halfway up, like 2 centimeters a little high. And once we got that properly placed, we're gonna bend the LED light into an L shape. Now, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of you dudes and dudettes out there asking yourself, are these LED lights bright enough to create that cool thruster effect? And you know what? Got you guys covered. In fact, I already did an experiment 3 months ago with the master grade ball, and each of these thrusters are using a Pico LED light, and in the right lighting conditions, they can clearly be very bright. Now for this next step, this is clearly optional. You don't have to paint the thrusters like I'm going to do here, but for me, I want to make it as authentic as it possibly can from the original anime. But for those who don't want to actually paint the thrusters black, you got to make sure that you paint the inner part of the white areas with a flat black, much like what we did with the eyes and the thrusters. As for the main thruster inner parts of the inner frame, we're going to hit that with a nice metallic gray. now we have finally reached the part of the kit where it can be extremely stressful or it can be extremely rewarding. What we need to do is actually figure out where we're going to funnel in the electrical wire from the Gundam head down to the lower back of the Gundam. So as you can clearly see here, I'm marking areas onto the inner frame pieces in which I'm going to drill a hole, as well as areas that I'm actually going to groove out so I can funnel the electrical wire even better. Because the electrical wire is not going to go all the way through the main polycap of this Gundam head. It's just going to be resting around the outer edge. And that goes double for the cockpit area because we're focusing all our energy to funnel all the electrical wire into the lower back. As you can clearly see here, I didn't paint the little figure ring for Zek's Marquise because we're not installing LED lights into the cockpit, plus it would be a big waste of time. As you can clearly see here, I am mapping out areas in which I'm actually going to cut the plastic and funnel it down to this little square area. Alright, halfway there. So now comes the next challenging part. It's actually funneling all the electrical wiring from the thrusters into the lower back. So we're going to actually need to drill in some holes around the side edges of this model kit. And the beautiful thing about it is there's just enough housing there to where it won't cause any issues of closing the plastic to the back. So that's the beautiful thing I love about this Tallgeese. It's bulky enough to where you can actually put any kind of electrical wiring, but just enough to the point where it hides it very well. now for the next step. Now this is very critical. We need to actually trim down the electrical wire to the point where it's actually evenly distributed. And what I mean by that is there's some wires that are longer and some that are shorter than others. So we're going to use our snippers to cut it in half so that way it can be evenly aligned. And then to expose the copper insulated wire, we're going to use I believe it's like a 35 or 34 grit sandpaper to sand it off. Any kind of heavier grit of sandpaper will actually damage the wire and strip it off clean. Alright my dudes and dudettes, we are halfway done. So now that we have successfully installed all electrical wiring into the lower back of the Gundam, we need to create a solid connection. So the connectors we're going to be using is the male connector for the Gundam, while the female connector is going to be connected solely onto the power supply. And the power supply that we're going to be using is a AA power supply with 3 volts of power. Now keep in mind, when you buy these LED lights, you have to pay very close attention to the voltage that you are going to be using for this Gundam, or any other future builds in that in general, because the higher the voltage will actually damage the LEDs to a point where they'll actually be destroyed. So do your due diligence, pay attention to what you install, pay attention to your power voltage, and you'll do just fine. So after all the electrical wiring is said and done and you powered it on, it looks super cool. You're going to notice that the Tallgeese head down to the lower chin area is bleeding out a ton of light. Now this can easily be remedied by just using some plastic putty. And the plastic putty works very fast. It takes like literally 5 minutes for it to fully dry. Once it dries, hit that lower area with some flat black and you are good. And like that, dudes and dudettes, you are done. Now, I'm not sure if this method would work for a real great Tallgeese, so be careful with that. Also, you don't have to follow this part of the video. This is just something I add a little extra flair to the Tallgeese because this is just something I like to do for model kits. Also, I didn't add a video on how to install the LED light for the main weapon accessory because that's just something I want to do on the side. And it's not really necessary. Again, I just want to make it as close to the box art as possible. But thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I'll see you dudes and dudettes on the next video. Later.